Y'all, listen. Christmas 2025 was supposed to be soft lights, family photos, and that holiday love everybody posts for clout. But for Claressa Shields, that day allegedly turned into a quiet humiliation, one of those betrayals that doesn't scream. It just sits in your chest and rots. Because here's what's not adding up. Claressa goes live in a Louis Vuitton store, bags, flexing, a duffel bag real time. And then the receipt pops up. Her receipt. Her purchase. Her money. No confusion. No, maybe. It's right there in black and white. But hours later, that same duffel bag is suddenly presented like it's a gift from Papoose. A gift? So why does the receipt say she bought it? That's the first crack. And once that crack hits, the whole storyline starts leaking. Then comes the second punch, a first store video. Same day energy. Same camera angle energy. Papoose holding the camera, just like he's been seen doing in Remy Ma's videos before. And according to the claim, the moment that footage hit DMs and started circulating, it got deleted. Mysteriously. Like somebody made a call and tried to erase the proof before the public could connect the dots. But the internet doesn't forget. And Tasha K is out here saying she already had the clip, already had what she calls proof, and that's where this turns from messy relationship talk into something darker, a financial triangle. Because the allegation isn't just cheating. It's usage. It's leverage. It's a keep her close while the marriage stays intact play. And if you're wondering why money keeps coming up, tax liens, pawn shop receipts, debt, just know this. When people are desperate, love becomes a costume and loyalty becomes a transaction. And the saddest part? If Claressa really believed she was chosen, while he was still tied to Remy, then this wasn't romance. It was a setup. Now listen to what gets said next, because this is where the tone changes and the trick language starts showing exactly how they allegedly saw her.
I need a trick. I gotta put my glasses on, Jazz. Hold on for a second. I need a trick. Yeah, I need a trick. I need a trick. Woo! Papoose is out here looking for a trick. And he got one. Yes, beautiful girl. Beautiful. Gorgeous girl. Y'all ain't gonna tell me Claressa ugly. I'm sorry, she's not. She don't care what 50 Cent got.
Christmas 2025 was supposed to be symbolic. Warm lights. Chosen family. A moment where absence and presence both mean something. But in this story, Christmas didn't bring clarity. It exposed contradiction. Publicly, Claressa Shields said something simple. Disarming. Almost fragile. I was alone on Christmas. No theatrics. No rage. Just a sentence that framed her as isolated, emotionally and physically. And for a moment, people believed that was the whole truth. But the internet doesn't stop at statements. It follows timelines. And timelines don't lie, they collide. Because on that same day, while the narrative of loneliness was settling in, Claressa was live on camera inside a Louis Vuitton store. Not days later. Not weeks before. That exact holiday window. Luxury lighting. Designer shelves. Expensive bags. A duffel bag, front and center. Then came the detail that changed everything. The receipt. Not hidden. Not leaked by a third party. Posted. Clear enough to read. Clear enough to timestamp. Clear enough to prove one thing beyond opinion. The duffel bag wasn't a gift. It was purchased. By Claressa. And that's where the first fracture appeared. Because hours later, not days, that same duffel bag reappeared. This time not on a store shelf, but in Papoose's hands, framed as if it were something he had given her. A gift. The implication was obvious. The contradiction was louder. If it was a gift, why was the receipt hers? That question didn't scream. It didn't trend instantly. It lingered. And when questions linger, people start pulling threads. What unraveled next wasn't romance drama. It was pattern recognition. Because the story didn't just crack, it split. Later that same day, a video surfaced from a fur store. The setting was different, but the energy felt familiar. The camera angle. The grip. The positioning. Papoose was holding the camera. The same way he had in past videos featuring Remy Ma. Not speculation, visual consistency. And then, almost as quickly as the clip appeared, it vanished. Deleted. Not buried by time. Not lost in the algorithm. Removed. According to the store owner, the deletion wasn't accidental. It wasn't delayed. It came after a call. A call that said, take it down. By then, though, it was already too late. Because the clip had landed somewhere else first. With Tasha K. At that moment, the story stopped being about whether a bag was a gift. It became about who was where and when. And that's where the claim hardened. Papoose, Claressa, and Remy Ma were all in the same city on the same day, during the same holiday window. That's when the explanation changed. Suddenly, it wasn't they weren't together. It became, Those were 2 different days. But timelines don't bend easily. Same outfit, same camera handling, same store environment, different days, with identical details? That explanation didn't land. It hovered. And hovering explanations invite deeper scrutiny. This is where Tasha K makes the statement that shifts the tone from investigative to unsettling. Not as fact, not as proof, but as instinct. Allegedly. She says her spirit tells her something is still happening behind the scenes. That the marriage was never fully interrupted. That what the public saw wasn't separation, it was compartmentalization. And suddenly, the triangle redefines itself. This isn't a love triangle. It's a financial triangle. One person emotionally available. One marriage legally intact. And one flow of money keeping everything suspended. And money is where the story darkens. Because alongside these timeline contradictions, another claim surfaces, one that raises a harder question. Claressa was allegedly shown an $8 million Win Records deal. A number that changes lives. A number that stabilizes futures. But it also raises a simple, unavoidable question. If Papoose was allegedly broke, where would that money come from? This is where Tasha K drops what she calls receipts. Pawn shop records. Jewelry. Chains. Bracelets. Items that once signaled wealth, now documented as collateral. According to Remy Ma's own past statements, Papoose wasn't helping with bills. He wasn't contributing financially. He was put out. And shortly after, he was reportedly living in Claressa's apartment, driving Claressa's car, surrounded by Claressa's resources. Even the jewelry moment turns tragic when you slow it down. A chain given as a birthday gift. Claressa calling it new, then asking a quiet question. Where's yours? Because the chain wasn't new. It was his. And that realization doesn't explode. It sinks. This is the moment where part 1 pivots from public spectacle into something more intimate and more disturbing. Because when resources shift hands without transparency and affection overlaps with dependency, intention becomes blurred. And the final beat of this chapter lands with documentation, not emotion. In an old video, Remy Ma addresses Papoose directly. Not by nickname. By name. Willie. That matters. Because Willie leads to William/Will Mackey. And that name opens a different door. Public records. 13 years of unpaid taxes. Federal tax liens. 6 figures. Multiple filings. Property encumbered. Not gossip. Paper. At this point, the story no longer feels like celebrity mess. It feels like a structure under strain, one propped up by money moving quietly while narratives stay loud. And just before this part closes, the footage that set all of this in motion is addressed directly.
I'm sad to report. Because here's the thing, the Christmas thing, we gotta go back to 2025. I'm so sorry about this, y'all. We gotta rewind it back. I gotta do one spin for this. We gotta rewind it back, okay? So the Christmas thing had me bothered. Had a lot of y'all bothered. Claressa spent Christmas alone. She was live in the Louis Vuitton store buying Louis Vuitton bags and a duffel bag. Posted the receipt of the duffel bag online, had Papoose give her a Louis Vuitton box with a duffel bag in it and forgot that she had posted the receipt stating that she bought the duffel bag that he gave her. Then she said, hey, can you get this online so people would think you bought me something? Okay, cool. I'm gonna sit down right here like this. All right, right there. Put the camera up. Let's go. Same way he was holding the camera for Remy Ma that she claims that he was not with on Christmas Day.
The audience now understands the contradiction. They've seen the receipt. They've heard the framing. The illusion is visible. But the final note of this part isn't about illusion. It's about erasure. Because the first store video didn't just disappear, it was removed after pressure. And that brings us to the moment that locks this chapter in place.
And when this video came out, and they put it in my DM and I posted it, the owner of this fur coat store deleted the videos. He got a call mysteriously to delete immediately, but too late. Tasha K already had it, boo. Proof that they was together on Christmas. He was with his kids, his wives, Remy. He held the camera when Remy did her little video.
Not with certainty, not with closure, but with a realization. If videos are being deleted, if timelines don't align, if money is moving quietly, and if marriages are never officially ending, then this story isn't about what people said. It's about what they tried to erase. By the time the receipts, deleted videos, and Christmas contradictions settled in, one question refused to go away. Why did money keep surfacing in a story that was supposed to be about love? At first, it appeared subtle. A bag here, a car there, an apartment switch that no one officially explained. But then the narrative began to tilt not toward romance, but toward survival. Because affection can be faked, but debt cannot. This is the point where the story stops floating in speculation and drops into paperwork. Numbers, records, filings that don't care about celebrity status or public sympathy. According to claims raised publicly, the version of Papoose being presented, generous, stable, financially supportive, did not align with what was quietly sitting in public records. And this is where the name matters. Not the stage name, the legal one. Because once that name surfaced, the past stopped being blurry. Years, not months, not one missed payment, not two, but over a decade. Tax obligations allegedly left unpaid year after year. Lien stacking. Notices compounding. Numbers that don't disappear just because the spotlight moves on. At this stage, the story becomes uncomfortable for a different reason. Because it introduces motive. If someone is carrying unresolved financial pressure, the kind that follows you no matter where you live or who you're seen with, then every relationship becomes strategic by default. Support stops being emotional. It becomes logistical. This reframes everything that came before. The luxury purchases no longer look celebratory. The living arrangements no longer look temporary. And the gift framing no longer feels romantic. It feels necessary. And then the spotlight shifts. Because while one side of this triangle was allegedly struggling under years of unpaid obligations, another side was quietly facing their own financial gravity. Remy Ma. According to records discussed publicly, she was not standing on solid ground either. Allegedly carrying a tax burden so heavy it reshaped the entire narrative. Over $600,000. That number changes behavior. That number turns silence into strategy. And when two people are bound by history, reputation, and shared exposure, money becomes the glue that keeps them aligned, even when emotions fracture. This is where the story sharpens. Because if both sides of a marriage are under financial strain, then separation isn't just emotional. It's dangerous. Divorce stops being about freedom. It becomes about collapse. And that's when the third point of the triangle begins to look less like a partner and more like a solution. Claressa Shields. Publicly strong. Financially active. Earning in real time. This is where the allegation cuts deepest. Not that she was involved, but that she was positioned. Positioned as emotional cover. Positioned as financial relief. Positioned as someone close enough to absorb pressure without knowing the full weight of it. The language used to describe her role is harsh and deliberately so. A buffer. A lick. A cash machine. Not words of love. Words of function. And when you replay the earlier moments through that lens, the behavior changes shape. The duffel bag isn't a gift, it's optics. The apartment isn't comfort, it's shelter. The jewelry isn't romance, it's rotation. And suddenly, the Christmas silence doesn't feel accidental. It feels managed. Because while Claressa says she was alone, the claim is that Papoose was elsewhere, with family, with his wife, with stability that never officially ended. That's not a loud betrayal. That's the quietest kind. The kind that lets someone believe in a future while the present is already decided. And then comes the moment that hardens speculation into something closer to documentation. Not a rumor, not a feeling, but a statement tied directly to records.
And so that's why we weren't able to find details on Papoose and his financial records. And it took us a long time to get these. But when we got these and we saw that he currently owes and has not paid taxes for the past, not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, not six, not seven, not eight, not nine, not 10.
Once that clip lands, the air changes. Because now the audience isn't reacting to gossip. They're reacting to scale. 13 years. That's not oversight. That's avoidance. And avoidance, when paired with luxury imagery and emotional narratives, creates a split reality. One for the public, one for survival. This is the point where the theory of a fake deal begins to circulate not as accusation, but as logic. If money is promised but never transferred, if a deal exists on paper but not in cash, if the reassurance is enough to keep someone invested, then the benefit isn't the payout, it's the patience. And patience buys time. Time to avoid consequences. Time to delay exposure. Time to keep everything unresolved. Which brings us back to the divorce that didn't happen. The withdrawal that raised eyebrows. Because if separation would trigger financial reckoning, shared assets examined, obligations exposed, debts surfaced, then staying together quietly becomes the safest move. And in that silence, Claressa's role becomes tragically clear. Not as a villain, but as collateral. Someone whose earnings could float debts without questions. Someone whose public presence could distract from records. Someone whose belief could be leveraged without paperwork. This isn't a love triangle. It's a pressure triangle. And pressure doesn't need affection to operate. It just needs access. By the end of this part, the story no longer asks whether Claressa was misled. It asks something colder. Was she ever meant to know? Because when relationships are structured around avoidance, honesty becomes a liability. And the silence around the marriage, the silence around the finances, the silence around the deleted footage, they all start to sound the same. Controlled. Heart doesn't end with outrage. It ends with realization that the biggest danger in this story wasn't betrayal. It was invisibility. By the time the money trail surfaced, the story had already crossed a point of no return. This was no longer about receipts, videos, or timelines that didn't line up. It was about what silence can do when it's stretched long enough to feel intentional. Because silence, in this case, wasn't absence. It was structure. Up until now, every contradiction could still be dismissed as coincidence. Every overlap could be waved away as misunderstanding. Every financial question could be reframed as business. But there comes a moment in stories like this where the silence itself becomes louder than any allegation. And that moment arrives when the roles are finally named. Not publicly, not officially, but privately in the language used when people believe no one is listening. This is where the narrative turns cold. Because the claim isn't just that Claressa was misled. It's that she was positioned. Positioned to believe she was chosen, while the marriage she thought had ended was never actually dismantled. Positioned to feel emotionally special, while legally everything stayed exactly where it was. Positioned to keep investing time, loyalty, money into something that had no intention of becoming real. That's the difference between heartbreak and design. Heartbreak happens when plans fall apart. Design happens when plans were never meant to include you. And this is where the language used behind closed doors matters more than any public post. According to what has been alleged, Claressa wasn't treated like a partner. She was treated like a function. A buffer when pressure rose. A shield when finances tightened. A distraction when attention needed redirecting. That's why the phrase that surfaces later hits so hard. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's revealing. You're the lick. Words like that don't come from love. They come from calculation. They suggest a mindset where someone isn't seen as a person, but as a resource. And when you revisit everything through that lens, the emotional pieces rearrange themselves. The Christmas claim of being alone stops sounding like self-pity. It starts sounding like realization. Because while Claressa says she spent that day alone, the claim remains that Papoose was with his wife and child, exactly where the law still recognized him to be. That isn't chaos. That's order. An order Claressa wasn't part of. This is the emotional core of the story, not the scandal, not the gossip, but the quiet moment when someone understands that what they were experiencing wasn't a relationship. It was proximity. And proximity can be withdrawn at any time. This is where the allegation about the divorce becomes critical. Because divorces don't just end marriages, they expose finances. They trigger audits. They force transparency. They drag private arrangements into legal daylight. And according to what's been claimed, that daylight never came. The divorce didn't move forward. It was withdrawn. And that decision reframes everything. Because if separation would collapse the financial structure holding two people together, then staying married becomes strategic, even if emotionally distant. And in that strategy, Claressa's role becomes tragic. Not because she was foolish, but because she was excluded from the truth. This is where the story steps away from celebrity culture and into something more uncomfortable. Because it asks a question people don't like to confront. How many relationships exist only to protect something else? Reputation, debt, stability, control. And how often is love used as the language that hides those motives? As this pressure builds, the claims become sharper. That the so-called $8 million deal wasn't meant to be cashed. That it was reassurance, not revenue. That its purpose was to keep Claressa invested, emotionally and financially, long enough for other problems to be managed quietly. And if that's true, then the final reveal isn't about money. It's about intention. Because once someone understands they were never meant to cross from access into commitment, the illusion collapses. This is where the interview lands, not as entertainment, but as exposure.
The man is not divorcing his wife. She's not divorcing him because you are the lick. He is going to help his wife to get out of debt using the money that you make from fighting. So in my opinion, he's giving you a fake $8 million deal, which is credit. It's there. But if you go win, you don't need it. There's no money.
After this clip, there's no going back to ambiguity. Because this isn't framed as jealousy. It isn't framed as bitterness. It's framed as warning. A warning that Claressa may be funding a structure designed to exclude her. A warning that the marriage she believed was over never actually ended. A warning that her silence has been convenient for people who benefit from it. And this is where the ending becomes unavoidable. Tasha K's conclusion isn't loud. It's final. She doesn't say the relationship ended. She says it never started. Because starting requires honesty. Starting requires freedom. Starting requires the absence of another legal commitment. And none of those conditions were present. So what remains is a choice. Not for the audience. For Claressa. Does she walk away and force the structure into daylight? Or does she stay quiet and continue absorbing the cost of a system that was never built for her benefit? That's why this story doesn't feel like gossip anymore. It feels like a pattern. Powerful men. Ambiguous relationships. Women kept close but not included. Money used to stabilize silence. And patterns don't disappear when you ignore them. They repeat. This part doesn't end with outrage. It ends with clarity. Because once someone sees they were never part of the plan, the only real question left is how long they're willing to pay for believing otherwise. And this is where the story stops being entertainment and starts feeling personal. Because if even half of what's been alleged is true, then this wasn't confusion. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't bad timing. It was design. Carefully paced. Quietly managed. Emotionally expensive. Claressa didn't lose a relationship. She lost clarity. She was allowed to believe in proximity while commitment stayed somewhere else. Allowed to invest while the structure around her remained untouched. Allowed to stand in the spotlight while decisions were being made in rooms she was never invited into. That's not heartbreak. That's positioning. And the most dangerous part isn't the money. It's the silence. Because silence protects systems. Silence keeps debt hidden. Silence lets marriages stay legally intact while emotions are outsourced elsewhere. This is how people get used without ever being openly rejected. No breakup. No honesty. No clean ending. Just distance disguised as affection. If you're watching this and thinking this could never happen to you, that's exactly why stories like this keep repeating. Because they don't start with lies. They start with access. They start with reassurance. They start with promises that sound real enough to delay questions. Until one day, the receipts surface. The videos disappear. The timelines collide. And the truth feels heavier than the lie ever did. So ask yourself this. If the relationship was real, why did it need so much silence to survive? If the intentions were pure, why does everything only make sense when you follow the money? This isn't about picking sides. It's about recognizing patterns. Because patterns don't care who you are. They only care that you stay quiet long enough to benefit someone else. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So the question isn't what happens next in this story. The question is who's willing to keep paying for the version of it that was never real.